Eugene Joseph Eugene McCarthy was an American politician, poet, and a longtime congressman from Minnesota. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1949 to 1959 and the U.S. Senate from 1959 to 1971. In the 1968 presidential election, McCarthy was the first candidate to challenge incumbent Lyndon B. Johnson for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States, running on an anti-Vietnam War platform. The unexpected vote total he achieved in the New Hampshire primary and his strong polling in the upcoming Wisconsin primary contributed to Johnson's decision to withdraw from the race, and lured Robert F. Kennedy into the contest. Fellow Minnesotan U.S. Vice President Hubert Humphrey also entered the race after Johnson's withdrawal. McCarthy would unsuccessfully seek the presidency 5 times altogether. Early life. McCarthy was born in Watkins, Minnesota. He was the son of a deeply religious Catholic mother of German descent, Anna, and strong-willed father of Irish descent, Michael J. McCarthy, who was a postmaster and cattle buyer known for his earthy wit. McCarthy grew up in Watkins as one of 4 children and attended St. Anthony's Catholic School in Watkins. A bright student who spent hours reading his aunt's Harvard classics, he was deeply influenced by the monks at nearby St. John's Abbey and University. McCarthy spent 9 months as a novice before he left the monastery, causing a fellow novice to say it was like losing a 20-game winner. McCarthy graduated in 1932 from St. John's Preparatory School in Collegeville, Minnesota. He graduated in 1935 from St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. McCarthy earned his master's degree from the University of Minnesota in 1939. He taught in various public schools in Minnesota and North Dakota from 1935 to 1940, when he became a professor of economics and education at St. John's, working there from 1940 to 1943. He was a civilian technical assistant in the Military Intelligence Division of the War Department in 1944 and an instructor in sociology and economics at the College of St. Thomas, St. Paul, Minnesota from 1946 to 1949. United States Congressman. McCarthy became a member of the Minnesota Democratic Farmer-Labor Party. In 1948 he won election to the United States House of Representatives with Labor and Catholic support, representing Minnesota's 4th congressional district until 1959. He became the leader of Young Liberals, predominantly from the Midwest, called McCarthy's Marauders. In 1952, he engaged Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy in a nationally televised debate in which he parodied the senator's arguments to prove that General Douglas MacArthur had been a communist pawn. In 1958 he won election to the U.S. Senate. United States Senator. He served as a member of the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee. McCarthy became known to a larger audience in 1960 when he supported twice-defeated presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson for the Democratic nomination. He pleaded during his speech, "Do not reject this man who made us all proud to be called Democrats." Quote, he joked about his own merits as a candidate. "I'm twice as liberal as Hubert Humphrey, twice as intelligent as Stuart Symington, and twice as Catholic as Jack Kennedy." Quote, he was considered as a possible running mate for Lyndon Johnson in 1964, only to see fellow Minnesota Senator Humphrey chosen for the position. Along with Ted Kennedy, McCarthy was one of the original co-sponsors of the Immigration Act of 1965. He later regretted this, noting that, unrecognized by virtually all of the bill's supporters, were provisions which would eventually lead to unprecedented growth in numbers and the transfer of policy control from the elected representatives of the American people to individuals wishing to bring relatives to this country. Taking a turn to the right, McCarthy became a member of the Board of Advisors of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. McCarthy met with Marxist revolutionary Che Guevara in New York City in 1964 to discuss repairing relations between the U.S. and Cuba. The two met in journalist Lisa Howard's apartment on Park Avenue in Manhattan. The film Che Part 1 depicts this event. 1968 Presidential Campaign. In 1968, Allard K. Lowenstein and his anti-Vietnam War Dump Johnson movement recruited McCarthy to run against incumbent President Lyndon B. Johnson. Reportedly, Lowenstein first attempted to recruit Senator Robert F. Kennedy, who declined to run, then Senator George McGovern, who also declined to run against Johnson. McCarthy entered and almost defeated Johnson in the New Hampshire Democratic primary, with the intention of influencing the federal government, then controlled by Democrats, to curtail its involvement in the Vietnam War. A number of anti-war college students and other activists from around the country traveled to New Hampshire to support McCarthy's campaign. Some anti-war students who had the long-haired, counterculture appearance of hippies chose to cut the long hair and shave off the beards, in order to campaign for McCarthy door-to-door, a phenomenon that led to the informal slogan, "Get Clean for Done." McCarthy's decision to run arose partly as an outcome of opposition to the war by Wayne Morse of Oregon, one of the two senators to vote against the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution of August 1964. Morse gave speeches denouncing the war before it had entered the consciousness of most Americans. Following that, several politically active Oregon Democrats asked Robert Kennedy to run as an anti-war candidate. Initially Kennedy refused, so the group asked McCarthy to run, and he responded favorably. McCarthy declared his candidacy on November 30, 1967, saying, "I am concerned that the administration seems to have set no limit to the price it is willing to pay for a military victory." Political experts and the news media dismissed his candidacy, and he was given little chance of making any impact against Johnson in the primaries. But public perception of him changed following the Tet Offensive, the aftermath of which saw many Democrats grow disillusioned with the war, and quite a few interested in an alternative to LBJ. McCarthy said, "My decision to challenge the president's position and the administration's position has been strengthened by recent announcements out of the administration, the evident intention to escalate and to intensify the war in Vietnam, and on the other hand, the absence of any positive indication of suggestion for a compromise or for a negotiated political settlement." His volunteers went door-to-door in New Hampshire, and as the media began paying more serious attention to the senator, McCarthy began to rise in the opinion polls. When McCarthy scored 42% to Johnson's 49% in the New Hampshire popular vote on March 12, it became clear that deep division existed among Democrats on the war issue. By this time, Johnson had become inextricably defined by Vietnam, and this demonstration of divided support within his party meant his re-election seemed unlikely. On March 16, Kennedy announced that he would run. Many Democrats saw Kennedy as a stronger candidate than McCarthy. The folk trio Peter, Paul and Mary released a record, Eugene McCarthy for President, endorsing McCarthy, who had stood alone against Johnson over more timid men. Now, echoing him. On March 31, in a surprise move, Johnson announced that he would not seek re-election. Following that, McCarthy won in Wisconsin, where the Kennedy campaign was still getting organized. McCarthy also won in Oregon against a well-organized Kennedy effort. Even as McCarthy styled himself the clean politician, however, he dished it out too. Known for his wit, when asked if Michigan Governor George Romney's comment that he had been brainwashed about the Vietnam War had ended his presidential hopes, McCarthy remarked, "Well, no, not really. Anyway, I think in that case a light rinse would have been sufficient." Quote, he mocked Robert Kennedy and his supporters. A major gaffe occurred in Oregon, when McCarthy sniffed that Kennedy supporters were less intelligent than his own and belittled Indiana for lacking a poet of the stature of Robert Lowell, a friend of McCarthy's who often traveled with him. Some of those who joined McCarthy's effort early on were Kennedy loyalists. Now that Kennedy was in the race, many of them jumped ship to his campaign, urging McCarthy to drop out and support Kennedy for the nomination. However, McCarthy resented the fact that Bobby had let him do the dirty work of challenging Johnson, and then only entered the race once it became apparent that the president was vulnerable. As a result, while he initially entered the campaign with few illusions of winning, McCarthy now devoted himself to beating Kennedy and gaining the nomination. Vice President Hubert Humphrey, long a champion of labor unions and of civil rights, entered the race with the support of the party establishment, including most members of Congress, mayors, governors, and labor unions. He entered the race too late to enter any primaries, but he had the support of the president and of many Democratic insiders. Robert Kennedy, like his brother before him, planned to win the nomination through popular support in the primaries. McCarthy and Kennedy squared off in California, each knowing that the state would make or break them. They both campaigned vigorously up and down the state, with many polls showing them neck and neck, and a few even predicting a McCarthy victory. However, a televised debate between them began to tilt undecided voters away from the Minnesota senator. McCarthy made two ill-considered statements: that he would accept a coalition government including communists in Saigon, and that only the relocation of inner-city blacks would solve the urban problem. Kennedy pounced, portraying the former idea as soft on communism, and the latter diagnosis as a scheme to bus tens of thousands of ghetto residents into white, conservative Orange County. In the end, McCarthy appeared both remote on the issues and ill-tempered toward his opponent. Kennedy took the crucial California primary on June 4, but was shot after his victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, and died soon afterwards. In response, McCarthy refrained from political action for several days, but did not remove himself from the race. One aide recalled him sneering about his fallen rival, demagoguing to the last. Another had him say that Kennedy brought it on himself, implying that because Kennedy had promised military support to the State of Israel, he had somehow provoked Sirhan Sirhan, the Palestinian gunman who killed him. Despite strong showings in several primaries, indeed, he won more votes than any other Democratic candidate. McCarthy garnered only 23% of the delegates at the 1968 Democratic National Convention, largely due to the control of state party organizations over the delegate selection process. After the Kennedy assassination, many delegates for Kennedy chose to support George McGovern rather than McCarthy. Moreover, although the eventual nominee, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, was not clearly an anti-war candidate, some anti-war Democrats hoped that Humphrey as president might succeed where Johnson had failed in extricating the United States from Vietnam. McCarthy eventually gave a lukewarm endorsement of Humphrey. Although McCarthy did not win the Democratic nomination, the anti-war New Party, which ran several candidates for president that year, listed him as the nominee on the ballot in Arizona, where he received 2,751 votes. He also received 20,721 votes as a write-in candidate in California. Following the 1968 election, McCarthy returned to the Senate but announced that he would not be running for re-election in 1970, to the dismay of many Minnesotans. He disappointed many more people nationwide by declining to take a leadership role in Congress against the war. Indeed, he almost seemed to take a turn to the political right during his final 2 years in the Senate, as witnessed by his opposition to President Richard Nixon's Family Assistance Plan, a form of reverse income tax to help the poor get off of welfare, and a program similar to a plan he had proposed several years earlier. Though many liberal senators and representatives also opposed the plan. Politics after the Senate presidential campaign 1972. McCarthy returned to politics as a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1972, but he fared poorly in New Hampshire and Wisconsin and soon dropped out. Presidential campaign 1976. After the 1972 campaign, he left the Democratic Party and ran as an independent candidate for president in the 1976 election. During the campaign, he took a libertarian stance on civil liberties, promised to create full employment by shortening the work week, came out in favor of nuclear disarmament, attacked the Internal Revenue Service, and declared whom he would nominate to various cabinet postings if elected. Mainly, however, he battled ballot access laws that he deemed too restrictive and encouraged voters to reject the two-party system. His numerous legal battles during the course of the election, along with a strong grassroots effort in friendly states, allowed him to appear on the ballot in 30 states and eased ballot access for later third-party candidates. His party affiliation was listed on ballots variously as independent. McCarthy, 76. Non-partisan, nom, petition, nomination, not designated, and court order. Although he was not listed on the ballot in California and Wyoming, he was recognized as a write-in candidate in those states. In many states, he did not run with a vice presidential nominee, but he came to have a total of 15 running mates in states where he was required to have one. At least 8 of his running mates were women. Nationally, McCarthy received 740,460 votes for 0.91% of the total vote, finishing third in the election. His best showing came in Oregon, where he received 40,207 votes for 3.90% of the vote. Further activism. He opposed Watergate-era campaign finance laws, becoming a plaintiff in the landmark case of Buckley v. Valeo, 424 U.S. 1, in which the U.S. Supreme Court held that certain provisions of federal campaign finance laws were unconstitutional. McCarthy, along with the New York Civil Liberties Union philanthropist Stuart Mott, the Conservative Party of New York State, the Mississippi Republican Party, and the Libertarian Party, were the plaintiffs in Buckley, becoming key players in killing campaign spending limits and public financing of political campaigns. In 1980, dismayed by what he saw as the abject failure of the Jimmy Carter presidency, he appeared in a campaign ad for Libertarian candidate Ed Clark, and also wrote the introduction to Clark's campaign book. He eventually endorsed Ronald Reagan for the presidency, as a Reagan Democrat. final campaigns in 1982. He ran for the U.S. Senate but lost the Democratic primary to businessman Mark Dayton by 69% to 24%. In the 1988 election, his name appeared on the ballot as the presidential candidate of a handful of left-wing state parties, specifically the consumer parties in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and the Minnesota Progressive Party in Minnesota. In his campaign he supported trade protectionism, Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative and the abolition of the two-party system. He received 30,905 votes. In 1992, returning to the Democratic Party, he entered the New Hampshire primary and campaigned for the Democratic presidential nomination, but was excluded from the first and therefore most important televised debate by its moderator Tom Brokaw of NBC. McCarthy, along with other candidates who had been excluded from the 1992 Democratic debates, staged protests and unsuccessfully took legal action in an attempt to be included in the debates. Unlike the other excluded candidates mentioned, McCarthy was a long-standing national figure and had mounted credible campaigns for president in previous elections. McCarthy ended up winning 108,679 votes in the 1992 primaries. His best showing was 4% of the vote in Louisiana. Publishing. After leaving the Senate in 1971, McCarthy became a senior editor at Harcourt Brace Jovanovich Publishing and a syndicated newspaper columnist. McCarthy took up writing poetry in the 1960s, and his increased political prominence led to increased interest in his published works. If any of you are secret poets, the best way to break into print is to run for the presidency, he wrote in 1968. He published a collection of poetry entitled Cool Reflections, Poetry for the Who, What, When, Where and especially Why of It All. Some of his poems demonstrated his views on the Vietnam War. Private life. He and his wife had 5 children: Christopher Joseph McCarthy, Eleanor McCarthy Howell, Mary Abigail McCarthy, Michael Bennett McCarthy and Margaret Alice McCarthy. In 1969, McCarthy left his wife Abigail after 24 years of marriage, but the two never divorced. McCarthy was rumored to be having a long-term affair with prominent columnist and journalist Shana Alexander. However, according to Dominic Sandbrook's recent McCarthy biography, it was CBS News correspondent Maria McLaughlin with whom McCarthy was actually involved in a long-term relationship that lasted until McLaughlin's death in 1998. Death and legacy. McCarthy died of complications from Parkinson's disease at the age of 89 on December 10, 2005, in a retirement home in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., where he had lived for the previous few years. His eulogy was given by former President Bill Clinton. Following his death, the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University dedicated the Public Policy Center the Eugene J. McCarthy Center for Public Policy. The Democratic Party memorialized his death during the 2008 Democratic National Convention in Denver, Colorado, on August 28, 2008. The memorial included pictures of several prominent Democrats who had died during the 4-year period since the 2004 convention, displayed on a large screen. During Senator McCarthy's tribute, the screen displaying his photograph left off his first name but included his middle name, calling him Senator Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy was a notable Republican senator from Wisconsin, famous for his anti-communist campaigning and sparring with journalist Edward R. Murrow. In 2009, St. John's University honored McCarthy by establishing the Eugene McCarthy Distinguished Public Service Award. Eugene J. McCarthy's files as U.S. Congressmember from Minnesota's 4th District and as U. U.S. Senator from Minnesota are available for research use. They include executive files, general files, legislative files, personal files, political and campaign files, public relations files, sound and visual materials, and speeches. Presidential election results. Books by Eugene McCarthy. Frontiers in American Democracy. Dictionary of American Politics. A Liberal Answer to the Conservative Challenge. The Limits of Power. America's Role in the World. The Year of the People. Mr. Raccoon and His Friends. Children's Stories. Illustrated by James Eckerland. A Political Bestiary, by Eugene J. McCarthy and James J. Kilpatrick, ISBN 0-380-46508-6. The Ultimate Tyranny, The Majority of the Majority, ISBN 0-15192581-X. Eugene McCarthy's Minnesota. Memories of a Native Son, ISBN 0-86683-6810. Complexities and Contrarieties, ISBN 0-15121202-3. Up Till Now, a Memoir. Required reading. A Decade of Political Wit and Wisdom, ISBN 0-15176880-3. Non-Financial Economics. The Case for Shorter Hours of Work, by Eugene McCarthy and William McGahey, ISBN 0-275925145. A Colony of the World. The United States Today, ISBN 0-7818-01028. Eugene J. McCarthy. Selected Poems by Eugene J. McCarthy. Ray Howe, ISBN 1-8834777158. No Fault Politics, ISBN 0-8129-30169. 1968. War and Democracy, ISBN 1-8834777379. Hard Years Antidotes to Authoritarians, ISBN 1-88347738-7. From Rappahannock County, ISBN 1-8834775114. Parting Shots from My Brittle Bow.